Welcome back, you lovely, beautiful marvels. How are you? Hi, Dana. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Thanks. I'm good, Dana. We are
That's
back for
that's a
another
thing where you
episode.
say, "Hey,
Yeah.
how are you?" And you're not expecting it, and you go, "Um, yeah," or "Yeah." My favorite thing is when they bring you food in the restaurant and say, "Enjoy," and then you say, "You too," and then you're just,
I
some
know.
dorky autistic thing. Yeah.
Oh no, I've said that.
Oh, okay.
The more I do this, the more I'm like, wow, I'm really moving along the continuum, the spectrum
Yeah.
of things. It's really funny. No, I know I think it's like for me, it's just like not paying attention. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
you
And
know,
needing to get an answer out too fast, so it's not formed right yet. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
or like I always walk in the morning, so I say good morning. And then when I walk at night, just randomly and I'll see someone say good morning, good morning. It's like so
I
lame.
have one script and it doesn't modify.
Winning,
Yeah.
winning, winning.
Too
Or as
funny, too
the young
funny.
people say, that's an L. That's an
That's
L.
an L? What's the
Yeah,
L?
for a loss.
Oh, like
It's a
loser. Yeah.
loss.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's funny. That's an L.
Yeah, I'm learning all this like new speech, like facts, like good,
I
like
like how you're doing your hair
true,
too. That's part
right,
of it.
like this, or like
Yeah.
on God, like ONG, on God. I'm like, okay, I don't know what's happening here.
On
Lots of
God.
that. On God, like totally, absolutely,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
agreement.
Yeah.
Anyway, Dana and I are not necessarily here to talk about how old we are and how we need Gen Z speech to be deciphered for us.
But it's a good segue into
It,
the use of language and what language
yeah,
means to different people, right? Like words
yeah.
matter, right?
Words matter
Yeah.
and words
Yeah.
change.
Yep.
Words
Exactly.
matter and words change. And, I think for me, I struggled with this regarding like just the phrase or the title. I can't even talk. The words neurodiverse, neurodivergent, neurodivergence, like,
Hmm.
getting that under my belt. I still make those mistakes,
I do too. Yeah.
today. And I'm
Yeah.
really trying to be better at that.
Yeah.
But I do think that what's so interesting is, as I've shifted the way that I might refer to a neurodivergent individual, right? I have
Mhm.
now moved really squarely into identity first language because my clients prefer that.
Yeah.
And I'm working with teens and adults. And so they prefer that. However, when I was working with younger kids, parents would often use person-centered language.
Right.
And so maybe we'll get into that. Dana, you want to talk about the difference between person-centered and
Yeah.
identity
So,
first
yeah,
language?
and I really came in contact with this when I first was diagnosed too, and was starting awake and listening to and noticing a lot of what people would write that were themselves in the community. And we were talking this morning before we came on about a 2023 article that I was reading that really was looking at identity first, which is saying I am autistic, versus person first, which is I have autism or Dana has autism versus Dana is autistic. And one is saying you have this thing. I mean, I always have to think about the person first sort of started by trying to say that person is not all that
Mm-hmm.
label, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
think it sort of started out with the heart in the right place, like they're more than that,
Mm-hmm.
And so that's that person first would be like Dana has autism, and then I'm gonna give an example of how you struggle with the the neurodivergent community. Did I do that right? Doesn't feel right to
I think
me.
that's a neurodiverse community because I think
Diverse.
neurodivergent is an individual, but the
Individual.
neurodiverse is the
Okay.
group.
So the neurodiverse community, like mostly adults or young adults, said, I don't like that. It kind of feels like you are saying I have like this disease and
Mm-hmm.
it's this thing that I have. And I think some of it's changed also as we've learned more about autism, knowing it's a genetic neurological issue. And I do think that younger people are better about, and this is all positive, about identity first because it sort of is a descriptor for how my brain works. So when
Mm-hmm.
someone says, would say, I have ADHD versus, oh, I'm ADHD, to me, in my mind, when they say I'm ADHD, my brain sort of does this translation of that's their brain. Like that's how their brain works. My brain is ADHD. And I'm like, oh yeah, and then I think we saw that falling off first, where people wouldn't say I have ADHD. They just say, oh, I'm ADHD. And so this movement towards I am autistic had really gotten a lot of pushback. We saw a divide between adults. And by adults, I mean like probably 16, 17 and up, right? Young adults, however you define adult, and parents of little kids that were autistic. And there was a huge divide. And you could even see it in the literature. I could see it depending on which site I was on. If it was parents, it was they have autism. And if it was adults, they said I'm autistic, and kind of fighting about it. This recent article, though, this is very interesting, a new twist on it. So the identity first, which is I am autistic, it was almost 90%. There's only 13% of adults that still use I have autism, which sort of, people should be able to use whatever label they're comfortable with. So I don't have a problem with the 13% that want to still say I have autism. Fine, it's their label. What's really interesting about this study, though, is it shows the parent group almost the same. If it was 87% for adults use it saying I am autistic, the parents now are 81%, which is really much higher than it used to be. And I think that's the effect that the neurodiverse community is having on parents, and the explanation of why we want to say that. Interestingly, it flips the other way when we talk about psychologists and medical doctors and people in the psych field, which is, my mind was sort of blown when I was reading this. I was reading the text first and I'm like, oh yeah, okay, parents are getting on board. And then I saw the record screeched when I saw that fellow psychologists are still saying a person with autism. And then I'm like, yeah, that's kind of been my experience too. It still is fairly professions, when they have power over somebody, they don't change. They don't like changing, and they like sort of staying up there and saying, well, I know best and I don't care what you're saying. And it sort of is like the idea of a gender label. You can't tell somebody what their gender is. It's their identity. They tell you, right? And I still slip on this all the time. We have a commercial on here. It's for one of the hospitals around here. And it's a doctor who's also an administrator. And the stereotyped gay guy, kind of feminine, how I see him, right? I say stereotyped. And he says, I'm a cisgender male. And I remember me and my wife were sitting there watching it. And I'm like, someone needs to tell him he's not cisgender. And without a beat, she just looked at me and said, that's not for you to say. And I'm like, you're right. You're right. You're right. Thank you. Because I love getting caught in those things. If he says he's cisgender, that's his identity. It's not up to me to say, no, you're not, based on my percept. And so I think that you have younger people that have grown up a lot with those kinds of labels, and then to apply it to neurodiversity, it's similar, and we're seeing that zeitgeist change, but it's still horrifically pathologized and seen as like this disease state in our field, which is really terrible. And why one of the reasons we do the podcast, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I mean, I think it's funny because it's like, I would never describe myself as, hi, I'm Gwen and I'm a woman with Asianness. Like, I just would never,
yeah. Or
I would never
gay.
do that.
Yeah,
I have
I'm
gay, right?
I have gay. Yeah, I have the
right.
gay.
Yeah. And I see this kind of continuum of labels as, accepted, like kind of on the continuum of acceptance, right? So I think I see a lot of person-centered language, and I was taught person-centered language in grad school, right?
Yeah,
and that really came out of that place, like you said, Dana, of how do we respect the person? This person is not just the diagnosis, right? So well, I understand where it came from, and I used it because I wanted to respect the person. And then as I started, and so I think a lot, in my experience, a lot of parents with newly diagnosed kiddos or young kiddos, they tend to use person first or person-centered language. But then, as I've been working more and more with teens and adults, it's really shifted to identity focused. And so it's like, oh yeah, I'm an autist, or I'm autistic. oh yeah, like, I've got not, I've got, you know, uh, I've got an autistic sibling, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
this is, it's, and so I've started using it. And then I always say to my clients, if that doesn't feel right to you, please correct me. Like, I'm happy
Right.
to change that, and use what you prefer. I
Right.
will say, in general, though, most of my clients want and desire identity first
Yeah.
language, but my colleagues don't.
Yeah. Isn't that weird? I mean, I
Even
think
in
that,
IEPs and stuff, like,
yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not seeing that much, that
Wow.
transition.
I think
Yeah.
parents are getting on board with their kids, which is why we're seeing some of that shifting. But our field is really. It also reminds me of. I really press my students to, instead of saying ASD, I really press
Mm.
them to say AS, unless someone meets the criteria and you're talking about treatment for the parts that are hard about it. And because I think you can be autistic without being autistic spectrum disordered,
I know.
right?
Yeah, that
So,
D is the problem.
yeah, I mean, you can have anxiety and then you can have an anxiety disorder. You can have post traumatic stress that you'd expect, and
Mm.
then you can have PTSD, the D part. And I think that's worth talking about too. It's that sort of where does the label delineate and where does it become this, top down, I'm the expert oppression thing, which I think is what's going on in our field, right? I was as we were talking before we went on air about a study that I participated in. This person is interviewing psychologists who are autistic and identifying themes, and one of them was the biggest theme was this fear of stigma. There was
Mhm.
still one, I think, of the 8 of us that isn't out to professionals, and every other one of us sort of told our coming out story about being neurodivergent, and it was what's going to happen. It wasn't fear about telling family or my partner or whatever. It was, what are they going to think about me at work? And you're like, you work with psychologists and you're worried about that's a problem, right? It's weird. So we have some work to do to change that in our field for sure, right? It's crazy.
Yeah, and I mean, I consider myself someone who really desires to stay current. What is
Hmm.
happening currently? And I have to work actually kind of hard at that, right? Like,
Hmm.
I mean, I have to be very mindful and intentional, I should say, about that,
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
want to be respectful. I'm not sure that that's happening kind of across the board. And I
Hmm.
get, like, and we're here, right? We're in pronoun preferences. We're in these kind of preferences of labels and
Yeah.
identity. We're there from a zeitgeist perspective. We're in it right now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Um, but I do feel like the neurological differences as a minority or a marginalized group are not nearly as have not nearly come as far as ethnic identity, sex, and gender
Yeah.
identity.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So it's definitely an area where, how do we carve out space and draw attention to it in a
Hmm.
way that's respectful,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that I think is tough. Like, again, like, I continue to struggle with it
Yeah,
despite my intentions.
and I think some of it does have to do with what we're learning about it. I mean, one of my students sort of pressed back about that and said, "Well, what about like um, a kid who's diabetic? And isn't that a disease?" And I say, "Well, yeah,
Mhm.
if it's the underlying, they were born that way, and it was a genetic mutation that's caused this disease state." And he said, "Isn't autism a the same sort of thing?" I said, "No, it's not a mutation. It's probably a recessive carry gene, and you have to have a bunch of those recessive genes to express for this to happen. So there's a lot that's trying to go on to not have it express, but it's not a diseased mutation. It's a possible genetic outcome of humans, right? That's the difference. And I don't think 15, 20 years ago we could have said that. A lot of work's been done after the human genome trying to map these things out and figure out what's going on. The other thing that sort of blew my mind several years ago when I was reading about race, you have more genes dictating your hair color than you have dictating your race. So the fact that we artificially separate people, and that part, people are like, oh, it's that. I'm like, no, it's really the cultural differences that you freak out about, because it's the other and you don't take the time to look outside your own sandbox. That's what you're really reacting to, and that's okay. And I think that is starting a little bit in the neurodiversity movement, is this sense of, yeah, we're in a different sandbox, but we're cool too. Or, you can talk to us, right? As we see more people showing up in movies and television shows, and people that are public figures coming out as autistic, I think it helps, right? I'll get that on TikTok. I'll have adults. I have my intro video on there, right? And a lot of times people say it's so great to have representation, but a lot of times it'll be, oh, thank you for this. My 4-year-old was just diagnosed and I'm freaking out. And I'm like, I totally get it. But now I see you, and okay, that's opening my eyes to what the coulds be. And I'm like, that's great. So don't put someone in a tight container when they're telling you, don't put me in there, right? And so the sense of celebratory or wanting diversity in general are all good things. And it's our fear that gets in the way. And typically fear is just because you don't have enough information. So get the information, right? Ask for it.
Yeah.
Look for it.
Yeah. Ask for it. I mean, you gave that example maybe in one of the episodes we were doing about autism in the media, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how, your friend reached out and was like, hey, Dana, I have a question for you. That's great. That's like, what is your personal experience of this trait, of this characteristic? Like, wow, this person, is this person autistic? They never get angry. Was it Ted Lasso or something? Dana, what was it?
Oh, yes. Yeah. It was my brother-in-law wanted to know if I thought Ted Lasso was autistic because he never gets angry. I'm like, that's not what autism is. So he needed to do more reading about it, more research about it to know what that was, because that's kind of a stereotype view, right?
Yeah, well, like emotionless.
Emotionless. Yeah. Oh, I can guarantee you, when we get angry,
there's lots of it. Yeah.
We're perfectly capable of being angry. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if anything, I feel like many autistics feel things very intensely, and that intensity is actually what leads to some of the shutdown or the guarding or the avoidance. Right. Versus I don't have any emotions. Like, so
it's more like socialized, like, oh, you have all these big emotions, you need to sit still, and you learn to mask, you learn to repress it. That's basically what it comes down to. Yeah.
So this. So I mean, I don't think Dana, I don't think we're saying you must use identity first language or person-centered language. We're just saying that there are kind of these models of language use. And that there is a thoughtfulness and a sensitivity that's required when we're referring to other people. So not referring to ourselves, but we're referring to other people, being mindful of that, just like you would with any other kinds of descriptor, that we might use to function. Ask the person.
Exactly.
So yeah, I mean, maybe, in the comments, and thank you guys for your comments. It's really cool. I think Dana and I still are a little bit shocked that
people are listening, actually like it and leave comments.
People are listening to us.
That imposter syndrome, we will never get over.
We'll never get over it. It's okay. But if you want to put in the comments what your preference, are you an identity first or a person-centered kind of person in regards to labels and identity? That's kind of cool. Maybe we'll take a little poll there that way. And there's no right or wrong. Again, we're just here to talk about and maybe encourage our colleagues, Dana, our psychology and medical colleagues, to get to get with it.
My mom, rest her soul, she used to always say, she'd kind of put her hands up and she'd say, wake up. It was kind of jolting, and it was like, but I always hear that, like, yeah, wake up, people, wake up.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
sense of step outside your own lily pad and look around, and lily pad, sandbox. I'm using a lot of metaphors.
Lily pad.
Right? I turned into a frog suddenly, but like,
yeah,
look beyond your nose. As you were saying those things too, like labels, it reminded me of one of the wonderfully fun things about TikTok is they have all these filters you can use. So there's like all these artificial intelligence ones. And like the one that came out recently, it was like your Star Wars character or something. And inevitably, every time me or my wife does it, because we both have short hair, it turns us into a dude. And there would have been a point in my life where I'd be like, God, and I'm like, of course, because I'm sure that's what they programmed into the AI. It's like this stereotyped, you can't be a girl with short hair. It sounds ridiculous. We know that's not the case, but that same sort of thing, like you're autistic, you can't be doing X, Y, and Z, and you can't. And I think that's why we do this. That's why I started Awake. That's why I love those comments when someone says, I have a little kid who's newly diagnosed and I'm terrified as a parent. I want them to see what all of the possibilities. There's a reason we call it a spectrum, right? And it's not a death sentence, right? It'll be an uphill struggle because there is a lot of support for kids, right? Because they don't have fully formed brains, but you can get to a place that is right for them, I guess, right? But it's so hard. You and I have experience with seeing that, but if you're the one in that seat and facing that, it's terrifying, and no amount of reassurance from other people is really going to help, right? So I can see that, but representation matters, labels you use matter, and seeing other people with the label they choose is really important, right? So it drives me crazy when I have colleagues of mine that misgender people all the time. And I'm like, you couldn't take the time to just really, or one that always misspells people's names. I'm like, they've been in the program for 5 years. How have you not taken that little bit of time to respect them enough to learn how to spell their name? I'm not going to swear, so you don't have to bleep.
Nice job,
right?
Dina.
Hey, I always took a lot of restraint. Right? My
Dina,
mom's in my head going, "No, say it." But that, it's that humanness to humanness, and give us the time, and give each other the time to want to know. It's just kindness, really.
Yeah, it's a kindness, it's a thoughtfulness, it's a desire for understanding. These are kind of thematic things that roll through our podcast. And I would say, when someone says, I don't like that person-centered language because autism for me is not a growth or a disease or something to be cured. Right. I mean, that's, and this is kind of the backlash with Autism Speaks, part of it, there. Yeah. And, I think this is just a human decency piece. And it just, this doesn't just, extend to neurological differences. It extends, to kind of existing together on a planet amongst different people. And thank goodness we're different. We don't all want to be the same person. And I think the other thing that I think about whenever a parent, is really reasonably panicked and anxious about a diagnosis early on. And one is because they care so deeply about their child and they want them to be okay. But, the neuromajority, the world out there, isn't friendly for differently wired folks. Right. And that's, so it's like find the space, find the place where the strengths can be celebrated and the weaknesses don't matter so much. Yeah. And if you can't find that, create that in some way, shape, or form, and lean right in. Because if I think about where those people have been plugged in, where our society is better for it. And we can talk about a lot of different advances and a lot of different things that have happened in our world that have advanced us because of autistic brains.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we need them. But we need different thinking, we need variety and
diversity is good and
diversity.
Way.
Yeah, we really do. We really do. So it's about being, I think kindness is a good period and summary to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Be kind to one
Awesome.
another, like Ellen says. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Dana says, like, what? Be good to you.
Be good to you.
And
Yeah.
be good to you and be good to others, you know?
That's right.
All right, everyone. We will catch you in the next episode. See everyone later. Bye.
Bye.